welcome to the next edition of our guest speaker series. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. No matter how big or large, how big or small the crowd is, we still enjoy it. So I want to thank our speaker, Joe Van Remmen, for coming out. He's going to share with us his research on how the city of Buffalo got its name, which might be different than what you've heard in the past. So I will let him take it away.
All right, thank you. I want to thank Mr. Duffy for allowing me to come talk with you guys. I think this theory that I'm going to express might be a little controversial, but I'm going to tell you what my research indicated, and then you can decide if it makes any sense or not. So, my name's Joe Van Remmen. I mentioned I'm from West Seneca, and I'm a retired police officer from SUNY Geneseo, and I got involved in this project kind of accidentally. And how it happened was the pandemic, we remember, started around March 2020. I remember because the college basketball wasn't going to be played. And as we went through the summer, I started looking for things to read and stuff because you couldn't really interact with people. So I started looking at old books on West Seneca, and while I was looking, I came across this map. This is a map of the town of West Seneca from the 1850s. It's probably the first actual map of the town of West Seneca. I've had a conversation with the person at the West Seneca Historical Society, and they indicated that they thought it was, or at least a very early one. They're here, and you're welcome to come up, but it says the German Purchase. And the German Purchase was the Ebenezers, which were a group from Europe who came over here and bought the property, what became West Seneca, from the Native Americans. This map I found online, and I'm like, wow, is this thing real? I mean, I was like, I didn't know the maps from 1855 were around, and it was pretty inexpensive, so I bought it. And as I was buying it and sending the money to the seller, I realized that they were from an area in Iowa near Amana. And the Ebenezers, who lived here in the 1850s, moved out to Amana in the 1860s. My belief is that this map probably went with them. And the Amanas are the dryer, washer people. You know, some people probably have an Amana product. So this was cool. I was like, wow, that's cool. And it's cool because somebody probably dragged that out 150 years ago on time. I have no other reason to understand why they would have a West Seneca map in Iowa, other than this religious group that moved from West Seneca to Iowa. So I looked at that, I thought that was cool. So I kept looking at maps, and I'm like, I'm just gonna find a bunch of maps if the price is right. I'm not a real rich guy, so I can't afford a ton. But there was a significant one that I came across, and the map's in this book. It's the History of Buffalo, and it's by William Ketchum. And this book's from around 1864, 1865. And while I was looking at the map, which was, okay, one of the chapters he had was, Mr. Ketchum was the origin of the name of Buffalo. So I looked at the origin in his chapter. When we say Buffalo, let's make it clear. The city of Buffalo, or the town or the village as they came up, they were all named for the creek, which is now called a river, but at the time was a creek when they first recognized it. I've got 7 theories. There were 4 in here, but there's an additional 3. And I'm just going to go over those quick so people are on the same page as me as to what the theories are, so we can recognize them. The first one, of course, being a buffalo, a bison, right? That's the one that's the symbol of Buffalo, and it's the symbol of the Bills. I'm doubtful for that. Millard Fillmore, who is quoted in here, was doubtful about that. But Mr. Ketchum actually believed there was some, that may have been the name. So that's one theory. A second theory is that there was a Native American and who lived on Buffalo Creek, and Buffalo was named for him. Again, I'm not real big on that one, but some people are. Daniel Dobbins, who was a captain in the War of 1812, he talked about this a little bit when he was writing his lecture, or writing his autobiography, and he said that when he first went to a tavern in Buffalo, and there was only one building as far as he mentioned, this was around 1795, but he said that that's what the tavern keeper told him when he asked, "This is Buffalo, are there buffalo around here?" The tavern keeper said, "No." And he said, it was named after a Native American named Tassiaway, or Tehasawararan. And I've got those words here, I'll show them to you in a minute. The problem with that, they said that that meant buffalo. And in fact, that doesn't mean buffalo. In Native American languages, that means the place of basswoods. And this is important for my theory later on, because that will also involve basswoods. So that's the second theory. We got like 5 more to go. Beauflou, people familiar with them?
Beautiful river.
Beautiful river, pretty river. That doesn't come into it's not born until the late 1870s. So people weren't talking about that. Dobbins talked about the origin of Buffalo in 1795. Sheldon Ball talked about it in 1825. There were talks in the 1840s, and in 1860, Miller Fillmore at the inaugural of the Buffalo History Museum talked about the origin of Buffalo. Good so far? What are we up to, 3? Sheldon Ball, buffalo theory. People know the buffalo theory? No. The buffalo theory is that there were some French missionaries traveling through Buffalo, and this would have been before the British took over, and they sent out some people to get them some food. The people that they sent out found a horse and cut it up, brought it back and said, "This is buffalo." And that's how they're saying the term buffalo. I think it's a better story for buffalo, how the story of Buffalo occurred, than it really is for the town or the city. But that's out there, and that was in 1825 that Sheldon Ball shared that. There's also an interesting one. I would almost be on this one if I didn't find the other one that I'm talking about. The corn planter told Miller Fillmore that he believed that Buffalo was meant to be beaver on the 1784 Fort Stanwix Treaty, where they showed Buffalo was one of the, what would you call that, where it told you where.
The reservation?
Yeah, it gave you the outline. Okay. So on there, we have Tehasawararan again. But corn planter told Fillmore that no, that was wrong. They should have done Beaver Creek, which is a different Native American word. And that sounded kind of good to me, because I found a map from 1778 that showed Beaver Creek right where Buffalo Creek is. And it was done by a gentleman named Thomas Hutchins, who was with the British military at the time, became later an American, and was, I think, the first surveyor general, maybe of the United States, first or second. So that's another one. Let's see. Have I gotten all the ones you know yet? No? I think I got the bison, beaver, Beauflou, Tassiaway, Tehasawararan, and the Native American name Buffalo, and Buffalo. Okay, so that's 6 of them. I'm going to talk about the 7th in a few minutes. And you can see some of these are, this is a copy of the Yellow Kid map from 1804. And if you look in there, you can see
It's smoke.
yeah, above Smoke is Buffalo, and then you see Tassia Way.
Oh, yes.
So when Joseph Elliott made the map, he included the Native American Tassia Way, which means place of basswoods. Beau Fleuve, pretty river, beautiful river, it's my brother's favorite. The only map I have ever seen it on is this one, from 1931. So it doesn't date real far back. If we're looking for how Buffalo was formed, this one just doesn't do it. I'll show it just. But it does have the buffalo on it. Okay. So we got like 6 of these. We've covered 6. I believe the 7th one is the actual how Buffalo got its name. And that is, that came on first on this map here. This map, this isn't the original, this is probably a 19th century copy, but it shows the River Bois Blanc, or Bois Blanc, or Bois Blanc. And we've had this for a long time, and historians have looked at this, and you can see here, you see how Bois Blanc comes down here?
Yes.
Yeah, that's why it's probably not Buffalo Creek. It's probably Tonawanda Creek. And this threw off historians for a long time, because they're like, Bois Blanc is Tonawanda Creek, not Buffalo Creek. But the significant thing is, Bois Blanc means white wood in French. Okay? And one of the white woods that the French used were the basswood, which gives it the same name as the Native Americans were calling Buffalo Creek. So far, so good? Okay. So, I had a couple challenges. I found this probably in like end of October. I found this map online. Like, this is it. This is it. This is how Buffalo got its name right here. And I'm like, but Bois Blanc doesn't sound anything like Buffalo. I mean, it starts with a B. That's good. But it's really important because it's saying the same thing that the Native Americans were saying, that the name of the creek was whitewood or basswood or linden tree, which were covered all around Buffalo at the time. So I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I can't make this thing work. This isn't happening. I know it's right, but I can't make it work. So I'm working every day putting letters in, crossing out letters and taking letters and wondering, gee, Beau Fleuve might not be that bad, but Bois Blanc, I think is it. So finally, I'm pretty close to Christmas, so I've been working on this probably for a month or 2. I did something I probably should have done in the first couple of months. I looked it up on the internet. I put in BOIS, BLA&C, and I came up with some islands that have Bois Blanc. This is a 1755 map by D'Anville. And so this is of the time frame of the 70 Years' War that went 9 years, or the French and Indian War as we call it. This has islands way up north of Detroit, and they're the Bois Blanc Islands. And right below Detroit, they had Bois Blanc Islands. So I'm like, okay, the French had these Bois Blanc Islands, and now we got the Bois Blanc Island where Buffalo should be. And I'm like, it just doesn't work. But, thank you. They don't pronounce Boy Blank Island or Blah Blah Island. They pronounce
Oslo?
Pablo. So this comes from, and this one too, this is my favorite. They won't let me wear this when I go golfing, my friends won't. No. That's Pablo Island.
No.
And this is also a piece from Pablo Island. Pablo Island, I think in the 90s it went under, kind of similar to Crystal Beach. It was kind of the Crystal Beach of Detroit area. Some people, I guess, don't believe that this is Pablo, but we know it's Pablo because they built an amusement park there, and instead of spelling it B-O-I-S, B-L-A-N-C, they pronounced it that way. And it's Pablo Island Amusement Park, because they wanted to make sure everybody knew how to pronounce it, because people came like I was doing and I couldn't figure out how to pronounce it. So, Pablo, a little closer to Buffalo?
Much closer.
Much closer. And I'm just going to throw a couple of these out. Can you see these okay? These all are the same word, spelled differently, around 1755, and at least 3 of them are on the maps that I brought with me today. Do you know what it is that we're spelling here? It's on the maps of all of those. It's in Western New York. And I bring this up because Pueblo may seem strange for us to Buffalo, but when you hear what this word is, you might think it's strange too.
Is that Indian?
Some of it's French, some of it's American, and one's English and Italian. Yeah, but they're here. You can look at the maps, they're here. This is Chautauqua.
No.
Okay, so when I say Buffalo is pretty close to Buffalo, it's a lot closer than these look, to me anyhow. So that was like, wow. I just solved one of my biggest concern in that Pueblo is pretty close to Buffalo. Keep in mind, Pueblo, or Bablo, or Buffalo, these are corruptions of the French. The French were here. They either Native Americans heard them talking and then forwarded it to the English, or the English heard it from the French and came up with a word that was similar to what they understood. So, Pueblo, Buffalo. That's how it was. Island north here, Pueblo. Island here, Pueblo. Island, or river here, creek here, river, Buffalo. All spelled the same, all with the same spelling. One of the interesting parts too is that this is one of the earliest spellings of it. Buffalo. This is my part about the Buffalo Bills. Let's go Buffalo, right? Isn't that what we say every Sunday during the fall? Let's go Buffalo. Because it sounds better having 3 syllables. But I don't think when we normally talk, we necessarily use that A or emphasize it the way we do when we're cheering on the Bills. And it's more like Buffalo. There were other spellings. The first spelling up here is the first time that I have found that Buffalo was on the map. It was spelled B-U-F-F-E-L-O-E. And then another one by this, I believe the same author or same cartographer, spelled it with the L-O-W. Okay, so that got me at least halfway to where I wanted to be, in that I now had kind of something that at least could go pronunciation-wise with Buffalo. I still had a big problem in that Pouchot, who was the captain who made that map, which, where'd we go with that map?
There's a map behind this map, so.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Okay, this is Pouchot's map. came out in 1782, I believe. It was made, though, around the time of the French and Indian War. He was the captain in charge of Niagara. He surrendered it to the French in 1759. Now I'll show you this up here. But in 1760, less than a year from when it was surrendered, the English are saying that that creek is called Buffalo. And it's known as Buffalo, meaning we didn't name it, we just got here. It was already known as Buffalo. Well, the French don't say Buffalo. The Native Americans don't say Buffalo. So the English heard something, just like the people did up in those islands when the English heard or took over, and they made it into something they would understand. And they called it Buffalo. That's at least my premise. But I still got the problem because this map looks more like Bablo is Tonawanda Creek. I'm like, oh. And historians to this day will tell you that it is. Not necessarily this historian, but historians who delve into this. I mean, I can take a book out of here that's from the 80s or 90s where they say this Bablo was Tonawanda Creek. And once famous historians do that, it's kind of like a rubber stamp. And they did that in the 1860s. The map came from Pouchot's memoirs. He died in 1769, but the maps and the autobiography weren't published in 1781. So I'm not sure if somehow the maps got screwed up a little. But O.H. Marshall, who was probably the predominant Buffalo historian of the middle 1860s, along with maybe Orsimus Turner. It's interesting that two historians from Buffalo were named Orsimus. I mean, that's a whole thing. So we got this thing where it's like, they're telling me this is Tonawanda Creek. I'm like, well, it can't be Tonawanda Creek if I'm calling it Buffalo and saying it's Buffalo. So I found this map after I figured out the Buffalo part. And this map shows the River Buffalo in its proper location as Buffalo Creek. It also shows the River Chabot, which is the River of Horses, being, who's familiar with the Peace Bridge? Everybody? That's where the water moves pretty quick through there as it's leaving Lake Erie. And then after it gets under Unity Island, it slows down a bit. But when he did this map, he took it from another guy named Lewis Evans. And Lewis Evans had a map, but he didn't have Buffalo on it. He didn't have the River Chabot on it. As a matter of fact, there is no other map in existence that I'm aware of that has these two. And it's placing the River Buffalo right where the Native Americans say the Bass would. So it's agreeing totally with the Native Americans saying it's right here. Does that sound possible to people then? No? I mean, that's the gist of my theory, is that, now, one part I didn't mention. So Pouchot's this captain during the French and Indian War. He's in charge of Niagara, Fort Niagara. He surrenders in 1759 to the British. They send him to another fort, which he also ends up surrendering, although he probably was one of the most competent of the French soldiers. I mean, a lot of them, it seemed like, were thieves and stuff. He was an engineer by trade. So he did that map. He sent that map to Montcalm, General Montcalm. And General Montcalm was in charge of all the French troops during the French and Indian War. And he sent that map to him. Montcalm received it along with Governor General Vaudreuil, who was a Canadian, and the two of them didn't necessarily like each other, because one was from France and being led by people from France, and the other was a native Canadian who didn't appreciate a Frenchman coming over here and becoming the boss of the army when they're fighting a war. So they had a thing going. But the guy that made this map, he's known for letters from an American. It was, anybody remember reading it? Hector St. John was his name. He wrote that in 1781, I think 1782, right around there, right around the same time Pouchot did. And he was in the French army also, but he was an aide, a geographer aide to Mein Kampf's aide-de-camp. So he's here, and he's getting maps from all along the French lines of different places and things. So he would see these maps, and he leaves, not even at the end of the war, he took off before it, and came and became just kind of a wanderer, an itinerant surveyor through the 1760s, and then he married. He had a hard time with the American Revolution because he knew people on both sides and didn't understand why they were all fighting about it. I think he thought they could come to some type of agreement. After the war, he became French consul at New York. So this is a pretty astute guy, just like Pouchot was astute. After he leaves America, right around 1781, 1782, Pouchot's map and his history are out there in France, and they're talking about this at the salons, where the French get together and talk about things. So Crevecoeur, who was Hector St. John, his name is really Michael Crevecoeur, he called himself Hector St. John because he thought it sounded more British when he was living in New York. Crevecoeur must have seen Pouchot's work. He was in the army. Pouchot was famous. Crevecoeur would have known that. He was working for the aide to Mein Kampf. He puts this out about 5 or 6 years after Pouchot's book. So he puts this map out. It's not in his early work. 1782, he had the Letters of an American. It doesn't show up there. He does another one in 1784. It doesn't show up there. In 1787, it does show up. And if somebody can give me a good explanation as to why he put it in then, that doesn't involve him trying to correct Pouchot's map, I'd love to hear it. Pouchot's is the only one with Bois Blanc, or Bablo on it, for the creek, even though it's Tonawanda. And Crevecoeur is the only person that put Bablo and the River au Chabot, which is mentioned in Pouchot's book, but it doesn't show up on his map. So that is pretty much it in a nutshell as to how Buffalo got its name. Is that it was a corruption of the French, and it wasn't the same as Pueblo. But corruptions can take a lot of forms, as we saw with those other words. Anybody have any questions? Did I go through it so you understand it, or I know I understand it because I look at it like every day. But
It's quite unique in a sense where most towns have a name because of Elmville, or period, and then it may get changed because somebody said, "Nah, forget about that. This guy's very famous. We'll name it after him." And it's that simple.
and we can see that.
But Buffalo,
I mean, we know Rochester is from Nathaniel Rochester. I mean, it's pretty easy. A lot of Corning was because Corning was a famous industrialist. So names are commonly, we know how they got there. But Buffalo, it's been 230 years, and I got to present this now because we don't agree on it. I mentioned 7 different theories, and probably people believe in all 7. Somebody believes in all the different 7. But I think I have more evidence than any of the others, and probably more evidence than all of them combined. A lot of them are stories that somebody made up because it sounded good, like the Buffalo one, the Buffalo where they.
what was the year where Buffalo? Has there been a year attached to the actual name?
Yes. For a long time, into the 1860s, it was the Gilbert family had been taken hostage by the Native Americans, and that was the earliest. And then 1784, Fort Stanwix mentions buffalo on the survey lines. So that's bringing it back to 1780, 84. That's what most of the historians were working with in the 19th century. This map here, which just
Go ahead. There you go.
this map, and for a long time I thought it was 1760, but I may give it a chance that it was 1761. But that's still 2 years after the French left that we first see buffalo on a map. We see it on in a publication in 1764 by John Montresor, who's writing a diary. He mentions that they, when they were looking to make Fort Erie, they went up the Buffalo Creek looking to see if that was a spot for Fort Erie, but then they decided to go across the river and do it there.
Was Buffalo a port? The location of Buffalo, was that initiated because it was a port, because of the waterways? That's why it was so important to the French and the British?
Man, you are leading me in the right direction here. It's like he's a plant. Yeah, I mentioned River aux Chevaux, and I mentioned that most historians believe that's Buffalo Creek. Crevecoeur doesn't. He believes it's probably either Scajaquada Creek or Cornelius Creek, which kind of doesn't exist much anymore. I think it's a sewer thing that runs out of Buffalo, but it was a creek at the time that these guys would have been here. And when they talked about the River aux Chevaux, they always talked about it in the context of the Little Rapid, which I mentioned to you, it goes from the Peace Bridge down to Unity Island, down to the end. The Little Rapid and the River aux Chevaux were commonly talked about the same. So Buffalo's way up here. So Scajaquada Creek and Cornelius Creek are right here in this area where they're talking about. So I believe they are River aux Chevaux. There's another reason I believe it. There's a couple others. One, it's the River of Horses, because the French are going to be taking things into Lake Erie from Fort Niagara. They're going to be dragging them up. The water's flowing down towards Fort Niagara, so they're bringing it up. When they get here to these rapids, they can't get through them. I mean, big ships can with lots of sails, but little boats can't. So they take it over towards Scajaquada Creek. They have horses there, and the horses bring them up to where Bird Island was and Bird Island Pier is now. And then they would put them back on the boats, but they would take all the stuff off and then drag the boats up, drag those up and put it back in. Now, another reason that I believe that's true is there was a French adventurer who left one day from the little Fort Niagara, not the big Fort Niagara, the little Fort Niagara, and he traveled up towards Lake Erie. He stopped at what we call Frenchman's Creek over on the Canadian side now, and he said that he couldn't hear the rapids yet. Okay? And the distance he traveled, he was traveling at about 1 3/4 mile, or 1 mile in 1 3/4 hour. That's how slow it was. I mean, you got these things and you're rowing up against the Niagara River. And it took him like 12 hours to go, and I can figure out the distance, but it was like a mile for every hour and 3/4. Well, a couple days it rained, and then he goes and writes in his journal again that he went to the River aux Chevaux. Now, if it was Buffalo's probably 4 or 5 miles. And that's right in, the waters are traveling about 2 miles from after Unity Island down to Niagara Falls. They're traveling closer to 6 between Unity Island and the Peace Bridge. So it should take longer to go 5 miles than an hour. But he got to River aux Chevaux in an hour. So he didn't go here to Buffalo. He went either to Cornelius Creek or to the River aux Chevaux, which was Scajaquada Creek. And again, historians early on, they didn't have some of this information, and they labeled these things. And then with more information coming in, no one ever tried to look at it and say, does that still make sense? At least that's my opinion. There might be other information out there that I'm not aware of that would dispute what I'm saying, but that's pretty basic. You cannot go 4 to 5 miles up a creek or up the Niagara River in an hour rowing the boats. But you could get over from Frenchman's Creek over here to Skijaquada. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, Buffalo was not a port until basically the Erie Canal is ready to come in. Black Rock was the port, which is where Skijaquada Creek comes in.
Okay.
So that's where Black Rock was the better port, pretty much all the way through, but because of its location in the rapids, it could be hard to get to for certain ships. So, but yeah, the Buffalo as a port city doesn't happen until the Erie Canal is becoming a reality. So,
And think about this from, it's called the River au Chabot, the River of Horses. If you got to get up this river that's flowing at 6 miles an hour, do you want the horses up here, or do you want them down here so they can drag your boat up? Do you want them all the way up here so you have to get off the boat, go all the way up there, get the horses, bring them back, and then bring your boat up? Why not have
So
them
they
right
had
here?
like a tow path there where they were?
They did, it ended up being similar to the Erie Canal tow path.
that's actually where, well, the French
It is.
started it, but the porter of the Lewiston area, they made their money in portage and taking the things up. So Lewiston became one of those points where they would get off and take it over to Lake Ontario because they couldn't get through the falls, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
So,
And it's interesting that they chose Black Rock, as you're mentioning, the same place that I believe the French chose, even though historians say, you know that, what is it, the grain elevator that got tore down? Near that grain elevator, there's a plaque saying this is where the River au Chabot is. I'm like, I don't know why they would have went all the hell way up there when they could have had it right down below Skijaquada and dragged their boat up to, like I said, where Bird Island used to be, and drop it.
These things are the water's pretty calm up by that Great Northern elevator that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Where,
And there's something about that too. Pouchot said that Bois Blanc, meaning the Tonawanda Creek, was a slow-moving creek. The actual name Tonawanda in Native American language is a fast-moving creek.
Swift River.
Yeah. So why would they name it slow-moving if it was fast-moving? If the Native Americans are saying it's fast-moving creek, okay, let's name it, or say it, that it's a slow-moving creek. Pouchot described it as that. So that's, but thank you for that. Anybody else with any other questions? How are we doing for time?
so Bublo was land of the Basswoods?
Land of the Basswoods.
Okay.
And basswoods were really important to Native Americans who used the bark for shelters, but also used the wood for fasteners and basketry. When the French came, they needed the same things. They needed basketry, they needed fasteners. They didn't use them for shelter necessarily, but they wanted to know where they were. Thus, they were naming islands for it, they're naming creeks for it, rather than naming them after some governor or naming them after the king, which doesn't really help you describe anything. They're doing maps where you, oh, hey, we need some fasteners, let's go to this island.
Interesting. That's an interesting map.
Yeah, and you see right here, Swift, that's the Peace Bridge to Unity Island. He's got it wrong here, but it's close enough.
And where's the Tonawanda Creek from there? Is that Tegia?
It's not on there.
Okay.
One
Oh, I see.
of the things,
Yeah, this is the Genesee here. Yeah, so it would be, yeah, it's not on there, but it'd be coming. Yeah, here's the portage as we're talking about.
right,
Yeah, to get around the rapid, get around the falls, basically.
but part of my problem with the historians is they gave Tonawanda Creek this importance that it probably didn't have. It was the home to some Native Americans who they would have used to help them with portaging and worked with. But if you're traveling from Niagara to Lake Erie, you're never going by Tonawanda Creek. It's much shorter to go on the west side of Grand Island than it is. It's probably a mile or two longer than when you're only traveling a mile and 3/4 every hour. You want to make it as short as possible. Can you show me the other map? And I still can't. I told you that Buffalo Creek is here, right here. And Tonawanda Creek is here. On the map in here, they're saying that this is a creek known as Buffalo Creek. They're saying here, Tonawanda, they don't know what the name of it is, a creek whose name is unknown. So if this was important to the French, and the French called it Bablo, how come that didn't get relayed to the British? And you see the way they went, you see the lines there? That's the way they sailed or boated up there. They didn't come down here. You can see that this is longer.
Oh, yes, much longer.
Right. So, I don't know how much they cared about Tonawanda, other than to go and visit the Native Americans who lived further down here. And yeah.
I had no idea that they towpaths on that section.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
And what's Will of the Wisp? What was the name of that? The first steamboat to go to ply Lake Erie. That had to be towed. And it was built at Black Rock, and they couldn't even. It's a steamboat, right? They couldn't. The steam wouldn't get it up the Niagara River, so they had to tow that up, and then it was fine once it got up there. So Black Rock, as you mentioned, was definitely where they were going for a harbor early on. Before there was a lot of politics involved in Buffalo.
Black Rock was actually a naval base. It's where they built a lot of the Great Lakes Fleet. And we had a presentation earlier this year about Black Rock versus Buffalo and who won out in that one, but by all accounts, Black Rock was the better waterway, and Buffalo basically made their own waterway. So, because originally Buffalo Creek really didn't travel too well into Lake Erie. It's a big sand wash there that they had to actually remove.
I think that's all. You guys are welcome to look at any of these maps if you want. I do have a magnifying glass, which would help if anybody's interested in looking at some of these. For me, they're hard to see because they're so small.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again, Joe, for that interesting presentation, and thank you, everybody. Just a couple announcements of upcoming things. Next Thursday morning is our next Java with Joe, and we'll be talking about John C. Gardner, the famous author from Batavia. And then next Friday is, we're kicking off Halloween season a little early. We're doing our first West Side Batavia Ghost Stories at 7 o'clock. And then every Friday in October, we'll be doing our West Side Batavia Ghost Walks. And you'll learn about a dozen different spooky tales from around the neighborhood here in the museum. And then Saturday, October 14th, is the return of our Murder Mystery Dinner Theater, which will be at Batavia Country Club, and it will be, it's called The Truish Murder of Johnston Lynch, who was shot and killed by Ian Rao. So you're going to have some fun with that tale if you decide to come. And all that information is on our website and everything if you want more information, or just give me a call and I'll be happy to share.